Well, good evening. You know, when you get to the end of January and the 1st of February, you're getting a little weary from the winter, and if you've been dodging sickness, you may have now been hit. So it's that time of the year. So we're so grateful for all of you being here. And so this is week number 45 together, session number 45. Not only are we grateful for our attendance and coming, we keep being reminded of the use of the internet. I know that we have people that when they miss here are able to catch up, and we're grateful for it. And it's been a while since I've welcomed some people that are watching us. I think the last people I mentioned might have been Tony and Nora in Richland, Washington. Since then, we have Will in Fort Worth, Texas. We have Roy in Perth, Australia. We have Michael in Shanghai, China. We have Joseph in Jersey City, New Jersey. Danny in London, England. And Scott in San Antonio that are watching one of the videos. Several of them have already watched some of the other sets and are now watching the Mystagogic Gospel of John. We hear from several that have contacted us more than once. We have now had, I think, 4 different ones from Australia contact us, and Australia has been in the news today with several thousand homes flooded out and so forth. Of course, Australia is a huge country, a huge continent. We have Cameron that's in Brisbane on one edge of Australia. We have a Robert that's in Melbourne, completely different part of Australia. And then we have 2 that have contacted us from Perth, which is all the way to the western edge. I guess it's west. It's on, I don't know how the direction counts. Is that called west, or we're still going west following the sun, right? They've had record heat in Australia at summertime there, and now they're having record flooding. So we hope that the 4 that have contacted us are safe, as well as their relatives as well. So welcome this evening. We're ready then to pick up with we are in chapter 58, and we are in part C. I don't know what page number it would be in your notes, but it's going to be 14, where my peace I give to you, will be the heading that's there. If you have the big, thick manual, what page would that be on? 1021. We've had several that have missed, and that'll kind of let you know where we are. Not all of them are the same. Yours may be 1023 or the other way, because depending on when you get a manual, if I've already corrected it, and all those pages that I sometimes pass out have already been incorporated into those. Those of you that have the printed book, it's an entirely different page number system. So my peace I give to you. I would give those page numbers out that are in the book, but they've already changed because those handouts are now in it. 1425, these things I have spoken to you while being present with you. But the Parakletos, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all things that I said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. You have heard me say to you, I am going away and coming The word back is italicized. You can use that, but you don't have to. I am going away and coming to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice because I said, I am going to the Father. For my Father is greater than I, and now I have told you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. But that the world may know that I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, so I do. Arise, let us go from here. In a world torn by marital strife between husbands and wives, torn by ideological strife between political parties, torn by racial strife between peoples, and economic strife between warring nations, in such a world, peace has come to mean the absence of strife. The peace that the world gives is always a temporary cessation of conflict. The world offers slogans such as peace in our lifetime, peace with honor, or lasting peace. In contrast, peace is imparted by Jesus. It is left with us and given to us. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. The Hebrew word shalom, which is often translated as peace, has a much deeper meaning than a cessation of conflict, or simply being a greeting or a hippie peace sign. The word shalom derives from the root consonants SLM, which has many cognates in the Semitic languages and means completeness, fulfillment, well-being, and harmony. Each one of us carries within us, as the ontological foundational principle of our own existence, the image of God. The image of God is, as it were, our ontological DNA. St. Maximus the Confessor calls this our logi. Let me just quickly say, I hope that those who are watching the video are able to get the book. For no other reason, but we have quoted over and over and over many of the church fathers, other scholars in the Orthodox faith, and monks on Mount Athos that are footnoted every time. I don't always cite them verbally. I cited St. Maximus here, and that footnote would be in it. And so you could see that I'm not inventing what we're talking about. That what do you have that you haven't received? This is what, I'm like the kid that goes into the candy store and discovers it all and starts running around going, looky, 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 looky. You can't hardly shut me up. I'm so excited with what I keep finding and sharing. Maximus the Confessor called this ontological DNA our logi. I like to pronounce it logoi. That's how I was taught Greek, but I'm now told that it's logi in modern Greek. So all of those that are watching this on the internet, please forgive all of my mispronunciations of all of the terms. And one of our viewers in Sparta, Greece, has been so kind to send me some pronunciation guides along the way, and I've been grateful. In the seminary here in the United States, I was taught one way. When I went to school in Switzerland, I was taught a second way of pronouncing the terms. And now that we have St. George Greek Church right over here, I'm learning the real way to pronounce modern Greek. And my friend is emailing from Sparta. Maximus the Confessor said, "In God the logoi of all things are steadfastly fixed, and in the wisdom of the Creator, individual things were created at the appropriate moment in time in a manner consistent with their logoi, and thus they received in themselves actual existence as beings." You're wondering, wow, what does all that mean? The image of God is who we are at the very foundational heart of our personal existence. We are created to live and to behave, to exist in a manner in harmony with the foundational heart of our existence. We are created to live in harmony with our ontological DNA. We've kind of talked about this before. Dogs always behave like dogs. Cats always behave like cats. We don't know how to behave. The disconnect between who we are, who we were created to be, and our behavior is what we're talking about. We are created to live in harmony with our ontological DNA. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Our ontological DNA we call the image of God. The likeness refers to behavior. Let us make man in our image after our likeness. We possess the one by creation. We acquire the other by free will. In the first structure, it is given us to be born in the image of God. By free will, there is formed in us the likeness of God. It's St. Gregory of Nyssa. We are created with the likeness, and by our own application of our own free will, we add the likeness. We add the behavior that is in harmony with the image. Our behavior we control by our own free will. It is no longer obvious to us because we have for millennia forgotten it, that in everything that exists there is an agreement, a correspondence, a harmony between an entity's behavior and its ontological existence. Gold behaves according to the properties peculiar to gold. Likewise does silver, copper, and iron. Even living entities with biological DNA have a harmonious relationship of their manner of behaving and their ontological, biological DNA. Dogs behave according to the manner of existing as dogs. It is the same for cats, birds, elephants, and so on. Are you getting it? There's a relationship between what something is and how it is, how it behaves. Everywhere the particulars of creation exhibit a harmony between how they behave and the ontological identity or properties of their existence. The single exception is us, mankind. Created with free will, each particular human is free to choose to live in harmony with his or her ontological DNA, or to live in disharmony with who she or he is ontologically. There is a radical difference between the two choices. It is the difference between harmony and disharmony. It is the choice for disharmony between the logi of our being that exists eternally in God, that we call the fall of mankind, because we have failed to move in a manner consistent within the logos according to which we were created and which pre-exist in God. Let us proclaim the truth of fallen humanity. Everyone carries within us our ontological DNA, the image of God. Everyone. This is our ontological origin, our origin of our existence, the very being that we have. This is our origin and our identity, not just generically, but specifically for every one of us as particulars of creation. Because of this ontological DNA, the logi of God within us is there. Anyone who abandons his own origin is irrationally swept away toward non-being and is rightly said to have fallen, since he did not move towards his own origin and cause, according to which and by which and for which he has come to be, come into existence. Having fallen in this manner, he enters a condition of unstable deviations, suffering fearful disorders of soul and body, failing to reach his inerrant and unchanging end, failing to reach the goal of his own life, by freely choosing to turn in the direction of what is inferior. Here, the sense of fallenness can be understood literally, for though such a person had it well within his power to direct the footsteps of his soul to God, he freely chose to exchange what is better and real for what is inferior and non-existent. It is little wonder that we fail to understand the human chaos surrounding us as an ontological tear within each of us. We each suffer from a self-inflicted wound of living lives out of harmony with our own ontological natures. We may say we love God, but our lives prove us to be liars. We do not love the image of God inside us, and we refuse to be in harmony within ourselves. So then, with the mind, St. Paul said, I serve the law of God, but with the flesh, in my behavior, the law of sin. We now live in a world that believes who we are and how we behave have two separate, distinct, independent, and mutually exclusive categories. Who we are and how we behave are two separate things, is the world we live in, the fallen world. We deny our lifestyles impact our emotional and physical health. There are those who now argue that our biological identity as male or female is mutually exclusive of gender, which defines behavior as masculine or feminine. According to their argument, our DNA may create our genitalia, but it is society that creates the gender behaviors of what is masculine and what is feminine. Now, it lies outside the scope of this present work, this seminar, to engage in a conversation with the advocates of the social construction of gender. They have been mentioned only for illustrative purposes to demonstrate the question of the relationship of what something is with how that something behaves. The point is this: the argument that we should be able to live any way we want and behave any way we wish denies that we have an ontological identity that imposes parameters of behavior in keeping with our ontological existence and identity. It is this denial of having an ontological identity that is Adam's sin and now our sin. Even if we have an ontological identity, even if we are created in the image of God, it doesn't matter. We can live any way we want, so says the Adams and Eves of this world. Some of us may deny our biological identity. All of us deny our ontological identity. And let me quickly say, we have the free will to deny who we are. It is not up to somebody else to force us to be who they think we are. God gives us the free will. I'm in no way advocating coercing anyone else to behave according to their biological identity or their ontological identity. You have the God-given free will to choose. But on the other hand, we have the obligation as servants of the Most High God to tell the truth about creation and that we have been created ontologically in the image of God. And when we choose not to behave in agreement with that identity, we are risking our own lives. We are throwing ourselves away, chasing non-existence instead of the reality of who we are. Having abandoned our own origin, we are now irrationally swept away toward non-being. He, Adam, and we have fallen. We now live in a condition of unstable deviations, suffering fearful disorders of soul and body. Freely choosing to turn in the direction of what is inferior, we have freely chosen to exchange what is better and real for what is inferior and non-existent. In the fall, in our own fall, we lost our future. You see, our beginning is our future. The image of God within us is our beginning. Living in agreement with the image is our goal, is our future. Becoming like God in our behavior is our future. The image is our beginning. Likeness is our end, the goal. The end is the same as the beginning, and the beginning is the same as the end. Or rather, that the beginning and the end are the same. We lost our future. We are now trapped in an empirical world of space and time, in a claustrophobic world of death. We are now lost in the universe. We could watch the TV show Lost in Space. We're lost in the universe. We have divided ourselves from the inside out. I'm not talking from each other. We have divided ourselves on the inside. We have torn our ontological existence apart. We have ripped our behavior from our nature and have become the disfigured and crippled likeness of who we now are. We have denied the image of God and replaced it with the ugliness of our selfish selves. In our pain, in our inward ontological pain, we strike out at others, even those we love. Our outward mask cannot hide the sickness of death that infects us. We are each one of us a house divided within ourselves. The appearance of strength and stability that we give to others is a lie. We cannot stand. A house divided against itself cannot stand. We are the house, and we are divided against ourselves. Even now, invisibly, we crumble. We are guilty. Ours is not some kind of legal guilt. We broke no rules or laws. Ours is ontological guilt. Deep inside, in our heart of hearts, at the center of our being, we know without knowing how we know that we have betrayed ourselves. We betrayed ourselves. Ontologically, we are a lie. We are a Judas. We are a Benedict Arnold. We have sold ourselves for 30 pieces of silver. We are a lie, and the truth is not in us. Who will heal us? Who will restore us? Who will make us whole? Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician? Wretched man that I am, who will set me free from this body of death? Who will set us free from being a lie? Who will deliver us from our own self-betrayal? It is into such a world as this that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It is to humans such as we that Jesus now says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you." The great physician has come to heal our self-inflicted wound. That which we have torn, he has come to rejoin. He heals us. He binds the brokenhearted by uniting our way of living with his ontological image within us. He makes us whole. He restores our soul. He takes what was disjointed and makes us united on the inside. For the first time in our lives, at the deepest level of who we are at peace. We are at one with ourselves. This is the peace that Christ gives. His peace is not a metaphor. It is real healing. It is real ontological healing. We now know who we are. Each of us is God's creation. His peace becomes a confession within us. I am God's creation. His image is in me. I accept who I am. I accept that I am thine, O Lord. I gladly accept that my end, the goal of my life, is my beginning, the image I have within me. I freely choose to live and become the likeness of thine image within me. By such a confession, Christ's peace is received. Anyone who receives Christ's peace, in this he is a genuine advocate of God, since the goal of each thing is believed to be its beginning and its end. For it is from the beginning that he received his being and participation in what is naturally good. And it is by conforming to this beginning, through the inclination of his will, I could say our will, and our free choice, that we hasten to the end, the goal, diligently adhering to the praiseworthy course that conducts us unerringly towards our point of origin. Having completed this course, such a person becomes God, becomes godlike, receiving from God to be God, to be like God. For to the beautiful nature inherent in the fact that we are God's image, God freely chooses to add the likeness to God. We freely choose to add our likeness to the image by means of the virtues of our behavior. It is a natural movement of ascent through which we grow in conformity to our own beginning. That's the description of how we are created to be. That was a description by Maximus the Confessor on what the vocation of Adam and Eve was. It is a description of our own vocation, the goal we were given. You see, everyone throws the word theosis around, and we don't have a clue how you do it. It is in the living of our lives that we began claiming we have the image of God within us. We are the image of God. We are to become the likeness of the image of God. That's who I am. That is the goal of my life. That is the goal of your life, but I can't claim your goal for you. I can only confess it for me. But we all have the same beginning, and we all have the same goal, regardless of where we go to school, which part of town we live in, and what we do for a living. That's just the external stuff of life. The ontological stuff is the goal of our own existence. by which we began to live in conformity to our own beginning. In such a person, the apostolic word is fulfilled, which says, "In him we live and move and have our being." It's in the book of Acts. Have our existence. For he comes to be in God through attentiveness, since he has not falsified the logos of being that pre-exists in God, and he moves in our lives. We are moving in God in accordance with the logos, the logi in us, of well-being that pre-exists in God, since we are moved to action by the virtues of life. And we now live in God in accordance with this logos of being that pre-existed in God. In this life, we have already become one with ourselves, and we become immovable. It's not, we're not like a ping pong ball or a pinball machine, believing one day and disbelieving the next. We are immovable in the confession, I carry the image of God in me, and my reason for even being alive, the reason for my existence, is to use my free will to begin living in agreement, in harmony, conformity with the image of God inside me. In the age to come, through divination, through theosis, which will be given to us, we will love and cleave affectionately to the aforementioned logi that pre-exist in God, or rather we will love and cleave affectionately to God himself, in whom the logi of beautiful things are fixed. Again, I'm quoting St. Maximus. You're going, boy, that's heavy stuff. You're right. I'm just giving you a taste of what the fathers of the church have been saying all along. We already have the image of God in us. We were created with free will, the only one of creation that has the free will to choose to behave in agreement with the image. We're the only ones. We choose now to live that way. This is the restoration that Christ has given to us. It is not something we wait for to do after we're dead and resurrected. This is who we are created as human beings to be. And if we're going to be who we are, we start now being who we are, rather than postponing who we are to be who we are until after we're dead and resurrected, and wasting all of this time being miserable, psychotic, messed up, fallen inside ourselves, and living in a world that looks like it's going to hell daily. I mean, look at the world through the eyes of our Savior. Look at the world through the eyes of the Creator who created us with the free will that we are all misusing. And look at the price tag we are paying personally, individually, and collectively as humanity for the choice to do our own thing with our own lives. This gospel is for now because it is the gospel of creation. Adam and Eve were created to achieve the being like the image. That's why they are created with free will. That's what they blew, and they've destroyed themselves, and we have joined them and now live on a planet of self-destruction. But thanks be to God, the great physician has come to offer healing. This is the peace that Christ gives. In this life, He gives the peace of already becoming one with oneself. And in the life to come, He gives Theosis, divinization, which is the fulfillment of the likeness, which is the end of the beginning from the beginning. There are some that get awfully close in this life. We call them saints. For all of us, no matter how close we get, on the other side of our death will be the fulfillment, finally the completion. But in the meantime, we begin entering into the peace of being in harmony within ourselves. It is at this point then, after Jesus says, "My peace I give to you," He says, "Arise, let us go from here." The last of chapter 14, verse 31, marks the end of the first division of the Last Supper discourses. You remember we are in the Last Supper in chapter 13, and then we have the series of discourses, homilies, if you will, that are collected and put in here at this point as the mystagogic instruction for the church. We have treated this division as a collection of homilies given annually at the Paschal Easter service. The first collection would then have encompass chapter 13, verse 31, where the supper is over, Judas has left, and then the conversation begins. Would have gone through 13:31 through 14:31. And then John chapter 18, verse 1 would have followed. 18:1 says, when Jesus had spoken these words, He went out with His disciples over the brook to where there was a garden, and they entered in. However, we still have chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17. Before we get to 18, Jesus having spoken these words, they went to the garden. There's more of these Paschal homilies to come. Let us arise and go from here. I'm going to stop right here. I know we're not too short. Let's go ahead and take our break at this point, because when we come back, I want us to begin chapter 59 and take a little excursus, a little day trip from where we are and begin to reflect on the Transfiguration. So let's pause right there. Let's go take a break. We'll come back in just a little bit. Thanks. We come now to chapter 59. For those of you that have the bound book, I believe it's the last chapter in the book. So we're coming to the close of volume 3 of the bound books. An excursus, a side trip, a day trip, the Transfiguration. The account of the transfiguration of Jesus on Mount Tabor is found in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Only 3 disciples accompanied Jesus up the mountain: Peter, James, and John. Of the 3, only Peter ever directly commented on the event. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16, Peter says, "For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.' And we heard this voice, which came from heaven, where we were with him on the holy mountain." Peter affirms the details of the event. He was an eyewitness. He heard the voice. He was on the holy mountain with Jesus. Of the 4 Gospels, only John's Gospel does not mention the Transfiguration. This fact, on the surface, is startling. The only Gospel author who was there does not mention it. Now that is strange, until we remember that John's Gospel is mystagogic. We often emphasize the first half of John 1:14, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." But let us notice the second half. "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." That's John's comment on the Transfiguration. We must remember what the resurrection revealed to the world. The Transfiguration had already revealed to Peter, James, and John. This man, Jesus, was God in the flesh. "When thou didst prefigure thy resurrection, O Christ God, thou didst take thy 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, and with them didst ascend Mount Tabor," one of our hymns when we celebrate the Feast of Transfiguration. Jesus came down from the mountain the same person he was when he ascended the mountain. The 3 disciples came down the mountain changed men. It is possible that Peter and James did not yet fully grasp or enter into a fuller understanding of the Transfiguration until after the resurrection. We tend to romanticize the people in the Gospels. We like to think they had instantaneous insight and understanding of the events that they witnessed and experienced. This simply was not the case. They were as out to lunch as we are. Like us, they did not immediately comprehend what they saw and experienced. Often the disciples asked Jesus to explain the meaning of his parables. John, on several occasions in the first half, earthly things, stressed that the disciples did not understand at that time, but understood later after the resurrection what Jesus had said. John carries this theme into the discussion of the betrayer at the Last Supper in the second half, heavenly things, when Jesus tells Judas, "What you do, do quickly." John tells us, "But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him." Notice that in the crucifixion service on Holy Thursday, Mary the Theotokos, who had welcomed the shepherds and magi at Bethlehem, and who had pondered all these things in her heart, is totally perplexed at seeing her son being led to Golgotha. Seeing her own lamb led to the slaughter, Mary the ewe followed him, accompanied by the other women. In her grief she wailed and said, "Where are you going, my son? Why do you hasten to finish this course? Could there be another wedding in Cana, and you are hastening there to change the water into wine? Shall I go with you, or shall I wait? Give me a word, O word, and do not pass me in silence. O thou who hast preserved me undefiled, yet thou art my son and my God." Therefore, we can assume that Peter, James, and John did not yet comprehend and fully understand then what they later would come to know and understand. But of the three, John was the first to leak the transfiguration and the resurrection when he entered the empty tomb, as we shall see when we get to John chapter 20. Of the three, John was the first to understand as illumination opened his eyes, and the implications exponentially burst forth in all directions. The resurrected Christ who stood before him after the resurrection was the same transfigured Jesus he had seen on the holy mountain. The two were one and the same. There was no distinction, separate distinction. John had walked with the physical Jesus, heard him teach, and watched him heal, and had only seen the surface. He had only seen the visible. He had been totally blind to the invisible that had been present and active the whole time. He had seen the fact, but not perceived the truth. He had heard the words, but had not known who was speaking. John now realized he had stood in the presence of him who was grace and truth. John understood he had lived his whole life trapped in the empirical world of the five senses. He had seen his uncle Jesus, his mother's stepbrother. He had been oblivious to the invisible identity of this man. His flesh had concealed the Word who had become flesh. The very act of becoming flesh had concealed him. His visibility clothed his invisibility, and his invisibility remained hidden even in becoming visible. We saw the man. John's gospel is not about the visible Jesus. His gospel is about the whole Jesus, the theantric one, the God-man, the visible, invisible one. John's gospel is mystagogic. John has been taking us up the holy mountain of the Transfiguration, that we too might enter the cloud and receive the divine illumination directly for ourselves, that we might be lifted up in silence by the power of the Spirit from written words and visible things to the Word Himself, that we might be lifted up beyond just the man Jesus and behold the invisible one who became flesh in Jesus. Jesus is taking us up John is taking us up Mount Tabor. He is providing the means and opportunity for the prayer of the church to be answered. We sing this ourselves, the hymn of the church, "When, O Christ our God, thou wast transfigured on the mountain, thou didst reveal thy glory to thy disciples in proportion as they could bear it. Let thine everlasting light also enlighten us sinners through the intercessions of the Theotokos, O thou bestower of light, glory to thee." In this troparion of the Transfiguration, this hymn, we pray, "Let thine everlasting light also enlighten us." Contemporary versions say, "Let thine everlasting light shine upon us." These are hymns of the church. Here already, now already, let thine everlasting light also enlighten us. We sing it in the church, mystagogically asking. We are going up the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and even as they had enlightenment, even as the illumination of who Jesus Christ is, so also may our eyes be opened. John is our guide, taking us, as it were, up the holy mountain, that we might enter the cloud, where the everlasting light shines and enlightens us. By taking us up the holy mountain, John is doing in his gospel what the church also prays. "Come, all ye nations, and hearken to me as we ascend the holy mountain. Let us stand in an immaterial manner in the living city of God, beholding with spiritual eye the immaterial Godhead, the Godhead of the Father and the Holy Spirit, shining forth in the unique Son. Thou hast infatuated me by thy longing, O Christ, and hast transformed me by thy divine passion. Burn thou, therefore, my sins by an immaterial fire, and make me worthy to be filled with thy bliss, so that rejoicing in both, I may magnify thy presence, O good one." In earthly things, John leads us from the plains through the foothills to the base of the mountain. Let me just show you. We need to know what we've been doing for the last year and a half. We started here, and there was a gentle slope to the book of earthly things, chapters 1 through 12. It was pretty easy going. Earthly things, seeing what our eyes might see and our ears hear empirically. But beginning to get a feel for climbing, beginning to get a feel for looking for the invisible that was present. And then when you come to chapter 13, we have to ascend to the upper room. It's an upper room. It's not ground level. We had to begin climbing, ascending in the first 31 verses of being in the upper room. And then after Judas left, we began with the little discourse that then turned into chapter 14, that I think we had 9 discourses in. If this is I think we'll get to 10 and 11 in the next book. This is chapter 14. Here was chapter 13. And we now, here at this moment, are taking a break, catching our breath. I'll never forget when I was a student in Switzerland, grad school, we did a day trip, the students, to the Matterhorn. I was delighted to sign up for it because I had loved the Matterhorn ever since I had seen the Walt Disney movie as an 8-year-old kid, Third Man on the Mountain. Went and read the book at the library after I saw the movie. So I was finally going to get to go to the Matterhorn myself. We left Zurich early that morning, took a train to Bern. From there, took another train headed towards the mountains, even higher in the Alps. Got somewhere along the way and had to get on a cog train because the incline was so steep, a train couldn't do it, and it had to climb its way with clogs up the mountain till we finally get to Zermatt. Had lunch there, and you could see off in the distance, you've seen the pictures, the Matterhorn overshadowing the town, the city. And then we got on one of those things that you've seen in the James Bond movies, going through the Alps where they fight on top of the gondola or whatever that thing is. And of course, you're always reliving those when you're on one of those things, hoping it doesn't break or nobody's going to fall off the top of the thing. And went up the mountain to the actual literal base of the Matterhorn and got to spend 30 minutes or an hour there, looked across the valley, and on the rising mountain over there, there was the shadow of the Matterhorn on that mountain. I didn't understand what I was looking at quick enough to grab a picture. By the time I got the camera out and fiddled with it, I'm not fast like Jerry would have been, the shadow had already disintegrated with clouds or something. Base camp. It would have taken then the official guides and all of that to have gone from the base camp up actually onto the mountain proper. I tell you that little story because this is where we are right here, right now, taking a break right here. We've taken the gondola the last little way. We're now at the base camp. Chapter 15 is coming. In earthly things, John leads us from the plains through the foothills to the base of the mountain. The slowly rising incline of the foothills has called for consistent faithfulness to travel the 12 chapters of earthly things. In heavenly things, we began the ascent of the holy mountain itself. It has taken only 2 chapters, chapter 13 and chapter 14, for us to discover the sharper incline, the slower pace, and increased determination and effort that is required to ascend the holy mountain. And Jesus says at the end of chapter 14, "Arise, let us go from here." In the Gospel of John, nothing is there accidentally. In earthly things, John used signs to point us and to teach us to look for the deeper understanding instead of being satisfied with the obvious surface appearance. We have already discovered a shift from earthly things as we have begun our journey into the second half of John, heavenly things. We have already noted that the last words of chapter 4, "Arise, let us go from here," would fit if chapters 15, 16, and 17 did not exist, and the story continued with the first words of chapter 18. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples. We have noted that 1431 seems to mark the end of the Last Supper discourse in John. We have suggested already that 15, 16, and 17 will be added as additional homilies at the Last Supper that were given in John's Mystagogic class through the years. But we are left with the question, why not omit "let us go from here" in chapter 14, or at least move it to be the last words of chapter 17, so that it would still serve as the segue to 18. After Jesus had said these things, he arose and they left. Many answers could be offered, most of which imply an oversight on John's part or the insertion of chapters 15, 16, and 17 by later redactors or followers of John. But let us consider the matter more deeply. I'm asking you to reflect then on this ending of chapter 14 that would take us immediately to the beginning of 18. And while we've now got 15, 16, and 17 added, why did we leave that last phrase in 14 there and not insert 15, 16, and 17 before it, and then you go right to 18? Let us consider the matter more deeply. What if "arise, let us go from here" was purposefully placed and left where it is by John? What if the very presence of these words at this precise location are there as a signal? The very presence is there as a signal. Already in chapter 13 and 14, we have ascended to the upper room of heavenly things, and we have already spoken of unknowable things. We have noted John's ascent of the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus and Peter and James. We have been invited to ascend the mountain ourselves and to enter the cloud for ourselves in the hymns of the church. The words "arise, let us go from here" mark a transition of our ascent. Trees can only grow so high up the side of a mountain. The tree line marks the line above which trees cannot grow. The lower region, where the trees grow, represents for us our living in the empirical world of our five senses. The area above the tree line represents the realities that are invisibly present within the empirical world. Like Adam, we have become blind to the presence of the things of God within the empirical world. And by climbing above the tree line, we free ourselves from the domination of the empirical, of the visible. To be sure, it was because our forefather Adam failed to focus the eye of his soul on the divine light that he found himself lost like a blind man in the darkness of ignorance and groping willfully with both hands through the confusion of matter, stuff. He surrendered his whole being to the power of the five senses, and he was unable by the means of his sense perception to make his own the things of God. Instead of God, he accepted the evidence of his five senses, thereby exchanging life for death and giving life to his own death. Having become blind to the things of God, mankind came to believe that there exists nothing beyond what can be seen, or nothing is more magnificent than the sense objects. But like the second Adam, let us acknowledge that we have twin natures of physical and immaterial, visible and invisible. Let us ascend. That is, let us acknowledge we have spiritual eyes and spiritual ears. Let us desire the higher heights of the divine light. Already, getting here tonight, you have had a glimpse of the light. Illumination has come. Now, many of the nights you have heard things you've never heard before. And you're going, who ever heard of such things? But there is a hearing beyond what we've already heard. There is a knowing beyond what we have been knowing, where suddenly you see. And you know without knowing how you know that you know. That moment of illumination. We have already had those moments, calling us to go above the tree line of the five senses to the realm of the holy light. Come, let us go up the mount of the Lord, another hymn of the church, and to the house of our God, to behold the glory of his transfiguration, the glory of an only Son of the Father, receiving light from his light. That's us. Us receiving light from his light and ascending by the Spirit. That's us ascending. We praise through the ages the consubstantial Trinity. Let us lay aside to the visible our attachment to the visible external appearance of things. Let us lay aside understanding only the external facts of the story of Jesus and his gospel. By saying, "Arise, let us go from here," Jesus is asking us to go higher up the mountain with him. Let us arise from the region of trees, from the region of visible appearance and external facts, and let us go above the tree line of the census. Let us arise and go from this place and ascend high above the tree line, that we may breathe the fresh, clear, crisp, and bright, rarefied air of illumination. John, the only gospel writer to be with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, now returns, as it were, to the mountain to guide us, his mystagogic class, as we begin our ascent of the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John did not ascend Mount Tabor by their own initiative. Jesus took them and brought them to ascend the mount. Never can a soul reach out toward the knowledge of God if God himself does not, having condescended, lay hold of that soul and lead it up to him. For a human mind is not strong enough to ascend such a distance as if to seize for its part some divine illumination, if God himself did not draw us upward as far as is possible, as we can bear it, for a human mind to be drawn upward and enlighten it with divine radiances. It is only in John's gospel we are told, "Arise, let us go from here." We have completed the first stage of our climb. The second stage rises before us. Arise, let us go from here. And we will begin our ascent with the 15th chapter of John next week. If you have completed this volume, then that means next week we'll start chapter 15 in this one. Those of you that are here and have the big course manual, of course it's already there for you. So let us arise and go from here next week. Amen.
So we know where we